The following program contains descriptions of violence which some viewers may find distressing.
When 3 airport hotel employees failed to turn up for their shift in August 2011, no one was alarmed at first.
They knew that there had been a party the night before.
Had they just overslept?
One of the 3, Attila Ban, was known as a model worker.
Ban had never put a foot wrong. Indeed, he'd become Employee of the Year at the hotel.
When the police entered Ban's flat, they were met with a scene of carnage.
2 young people, both clearly deceased. A great deal of blood.
Attila Ban was nowhere to be seen.
Nothing about the scene made sense.
There were no real warning signs and nothing to explain why Attila Ban went from 0 to murder in one night.
For taking the lives of his 2 young colleagues in a frenzy of violence, and for giving their devastated families no explanation for his actions, Attila Ban must be recognised as one of Britain's most evil killers. When Attila Ban was convicted of murdering Alice Adams and Tibor Vass in July 2012, it wasn't just the brutality of the crime that made headlines, it was the killer's actions afterwards. Inconceivably, Ban had never left the murder scene.
So after Ban had been arrested and taken to the police station, there was obviously then a debrief as to how he was still in the flat after 2 days of forensic examination.
Not only was he hiding in the murder scene, but he was actually watching the police as they were carrying out their examination of the room.
Concealing himself inside a West London flat for 2 days raised questions about Ban's state of mind.
That is a highly unusual behaviour. It's more common that if you murder somebody that you're going to want to exit the building as quickly as possible, make sure that you're not a suspect, to get away from what you've done. But in some cases, rarer cases, the killer will want to keep that emotional connection to the person that they've killed because they've killed them in a very emotional state, probably with sexual connotations, and they can just keep revisiting that. They can feel that closeness to that person.
The incident also raised questions about the way crime scenes are processed.
You have to ask yourself about the searching of the property at that time. How much more detail could have gone into searching?
Was actually quite unnerving for the officers that had been in the flat, particularly officers that had either maybe been in their flat on their own, to subsequently realise that he was probably watching them. Fortunately, nothing more severe came from that, but obviously the consequences could have been a lot worse.
Perhaps more than anything, the episode was a reminder to all that a killer's mind can be an unpredictable place. This killer's story begins in Hungary, in Central Europe, around 1980.
We know very little about Attila Ban's early life in Hungary. We know that he went to the United States as a young man and worked in hotels there, but we know very little about his family indeed.
In 2011, Attila Ban was 31 years old. He had been working for a couple of years at this hotel, very close to Heathrow Airport.
Ban worked as a receptionist at the 4-star hotel, which was within sight of the airport's runways.
All of that area is full of big hotels which have a very transient guest list. Customers come, stay one night and fly off.
Attila Ban was identified as the model professional.
He was hardworking, he was devoted, and he was, on the face, a very popular employee. In fact, he was so well thought of that he was chosen as Employee of the Year in 2010.
Ban lived in a flat owned by the hotel on the edge of the premises. In August 2010, he was joined there by a new flatmate, fellow Hungarian Tibor Vas.
Tibor was 20 years old and he was from Budapest. A very close family. His father died when he was 15, very close to his mother and his sister.
After his father's sudden death, Tibor had taken it upon himself to get a job after school to help support his family.
He first came to the UK in 2008. And according to his mother, he just fell in love with the free spirit of London. He came back to start working in the hotel industry.
Tibor was a very creative person. He loved music. He was able to play all sorts of different instruments, and he even taught his sister how to play piano.
He was also devoted to his BMX bike, which was called Daisy. And indeed, when he came to England, he brought his bike with him and did tricks in the car park.
He obviously engendered a degree of fondness with his colleagues and his friends, and he was likable.
Tibor Vas had taken some time out from studying after being turned down for a university place. He began working at the hotel alongside Attila Ban.
Clearly, Ban took Tibor under his wing. They both worked on reception together. They were flatmates. Tibor clearly trusted him.
Tibor kept in touch with his mother while he was in London, and in fact, he had introduced her over the phone to Attila Ban. And Ban had actually told Mrs. Vas, "Don't worry, I'll look after your son. I'll make sure he comes to no harm while he's here in London." Mrs. Vas was hugely reassured. She thought Ban was mature and friendly and intelligent.
He was Hungarian as well, and he'd been in the country for much longer, and he'd been working there for longer, and he would look after him. And I think that probably gave the family a lot of comfort to feel that there was somebody there looking out for their son.
As time went on, however, Ban developed feelings for Tibor that were not entirely paternal.
There can be no doubt that Ban fancied Tibor.
Attila Ban was openly gay, and in London, which is a very cosmopolitan city, that wasn't looked in any way different, unlike his homeland in Hungary. Tibor was a good-looking boy, and he took time to look after himself. His grooming, or the clothes he wore, or working out in the gym.
We know that Attila had a fascination with Tibor, but that was not reciprocated.
Tibor Vas, I think, made it quite clear to Attila that he wasn't interested in having a relationship in that way, but they were still friends.
In July 2011, a new receptionist began working at the hotel, someone Attila Ban instantly saw as a threat.
Alice Adams is from Iverheath in Buckinghamshire, which is a lovely part of the home counties. She came from a very close family, and she liked the outdoors and nature and the environment.
Alice had an on-off relationship with a young man back home in Buckinghamshire, but friends at the hotel noticed that she and Tibor Vas made an instant connection.
Alice and Tibor were of a similar age, 19, 20 years of age.
Alice Adams was, by all accounts, bubbly, charming, cheerful, a joy to be with.
She was just a really charming, pleasant young lady, and she had immediately struck up a really good friendship with Tibor.
They both were musicians, and so that would have been a common interest between the two of them. And there was, to all intents and purposes, a physical attraction between the two.
As Alice and Tibor enjoyed getting to know one another, hotel staff noticed Attila Ban becoming increasingly possessive towards his younger male colleague.
Tibor and Ban were both at a team event organised by the hotel, and Tibor was taking photographs. And in one particular instance, Ban thought he'd been left out of the photograph deliberately, and there was a sort of antagonism between the two.
And Ban absolutely hit the roof and launched into tirade against Tibor because Ban said he hadn't been included in these pictures.
I think Ban had cultivated this persona of being a wonderful, kind, caring, friendly person. It was clearly masking something else, and that mask definitely slipped in the team building session, where he felt so strongly about Tibor, he couldn't control the way that he was responding to things. That was a warning sign that where Tibor was concerned, he didn't really have control of the mask.
In the first week of August, just 3 weeks after Alice's arrival, Tibor Vas received good news from home.
He'd actually just been granted a place at a really well-respected university in Hungary.
Tibor was excited to be returning so soon to his family and his home city of Budapest.
He was going to leave the hotel on the 30th of August.
It was a date that would never arrive for Tibor Vas. On Tuesday the 9th of August, a group of colleagues, including Alice Adams, gathered after work for drinks at Ban and Tibor's flat behind the hotel. A little after midnight, Alice texted her mother to say she planned to stay the night there. It would be the last time her loving family would ever hear from her. On Wednesday the 10th of August 2011, 3 receptionists failed to turn up for their 7 a.m. shift at a West London airport hotel.
31-year-old Attila Ban and his 2 20-year-old colleagues, Tibor Vas and Alice Adams, were no-shows that morning.
Normally, if you're not going to turn up for work, you'd let your colleagues know that you're sick or something's happened to you, and then they would find other people to perform those roles, but that didn't happen. There wasn't any great concern at that point. It was just a question of, had they just overslept? Had something happened to them?
Mystified as to the non-appearance of these 3, colleagues started looking at the social media accounts. And around the time he was due to have started at the reception, they found a post by Ban.
Attila posted on Facebook, "I would like to wake up from that nightmare."
At around 2:30 p.m, staff from the hotel called the police to report their concerns about the welfare of Tibor, Alice and Ban.
Clearly, this was completely out of character for Attila to not attend work. And also the slightly unusual Facebook page gave the hotel enough concern to say, look, could you send someone out to assist us? I think any police officer who receives that call should be approaching it with sort of utmost caution. And I've had that in my situation, in my experience, where I've entered a flat and come across awful crime scenes. So you have to be hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. You don't know what you're going to find, so you have to be prepared for every eventuality.
At 3:15 p.m, local police officers went to the flat where the 3 had last been seen.
The scene when the officers entered Ban's flat was worse than they can ever have anticipated.
When they opened the door and walked into the flat, there was Alice's body beneath the window, covered in blood, fully clothed, but almost as if she'd been tossed on the floor like a discarded doll.
A pillow had been placed over her face, and it was clear to the officers that she had probably multiple stab wounds. There was heavy blood staining in that area.
A chef's knife was recovered close to Alice's body.
When they moved into the bedroom, they discovered Tibor naked, lying on the double bed with his legs drawn up.
Tibor's t-shirt and boxer shorts, bearing signs of having been cut off his body, were discarded by the front door.
The way that Tibor had been found, stripped naked and almost placed in a very deliberately posed position, would show that someone else had done that rather than Tibor putting himself in that position. Tibor had 2 obvious stab wounds.
I can't imagine. It must have horrified them. I mean, they were literally walking into a carnage, an abattoir.
Officers could see that their welfare check for 3 missing people had turned very quickly into a double murder inquiry at the very least.
Clearly a major crime scene. Obviously your first thoughts would have been to preserve the scene and to consider any suspects. But then immediately, first of all, trying to establish if there's anyone else in the flat.
The police had entered the flat looking for 3 missing people. They had found only 2.
There was no sign at the moment of Ban himself.
Upon finding this crime scene, you would have to be considering all options. Where is Attila Ban? Has he also been injured? Has he been assaulted as well? Is he the suspect?
The first officers on the scene had a delicate line to tread in their search for Attila Ban.
It's drilled into you from sort of day one, preservation of the scene. The first officers on scene would be incredibly conscious to disturb that scene as little as possible while still establishing that there were no other victims or suspects present.
There was a search of the premises. The loft space within the premises was also searched, but there was no sign of him.
The scene was very heavily blood-stained, but there were no obvious blood-stained footprints outside the flat.
Quite clearly, he wasn't in the room, although it was his room, so it would have the appearance of he'd done it and he'd run.
Ban had been alone with Alice and Tibor when their other 2 colleagues had left the flat the night before. There were no signs of a struggle, and nothing to suggest he'd left the flat against his will. And then there was the early morning Facebook post.
I would like to wake up from that nightmare. On finding out about that message, the police might have started to focus far more on him as a suspect than a victim.
With 2 dead victims and a potential suspect nowhere to be seen, the officers handed the investigation over to the Metropolitan Police Homicide Unit under the leadership of DCI Howard Groves.
Senior investigating officer is the person who has overall control and responsibility for a murder investigation. It means from the moment that my colleagues inform us of a murder, I would then have to make all the decisions around what we do in relation to identifying why someone was killed, who the victim was, who the suspects are, and progress that investigation.
Howard's team began gathering information.
We conducted house-to-house inquiries, speak to staff. We tried to make contact with family and friends of the deceased and try and build up a picture about those 2 individuals.
The first priority at Ban's flat was scouring the crime scene for clues.
The first thing would be to have the area cordoned off. From my experience, the crime scene was what I would describe as fairly tidy, clean. A lot of times when you have that many injuries, you'd expect to see blood all over the place, on the ceilings, on the walls. You'd find items have been tipped over. That wasn't the case here.
Processing a crime scene of that nature could take several days, a week, maybe even 2 weeks. Pathologists came out to the scene to see the victims in situ and examine the bodies before they are removed to the mortuary. The flat would then be sealed, and once that crime scene is sealed, only sort of relevant authorised people can go into it, such as fingerprint officers, forensic experts, other scenes of crime staff.
In the meantime, an operation began to locate Attila Ban.
As soon as a manhunt is launched, the police pull together a vast amount of resources.
There was nothing to suggest that he'd been seen by anyone leaving the premises. There was no CCTV footage to say there's an image of him leaving at a particular time.
Obviously, you would be looking at friends, associates, who could potentially harbour someone or help them evade capture. You would also be looking at all possible technical means to trace them, any kind of use of their bank facilities, anything that could pinpoint their position.
The initial action that was taken to trace him was by his phone, and it indicated that his phone was pinging in the area. So we had to ask ourselves, had he disposed of his phone, or was he somewhere locally?
While normally the police would inquire if friends and family were harbouring the fugitive, with Attila Ban this seemed unlikely.
We didn't have anywhere else to look for him, and let's be honest, Attila didn't have anywhere else to go. It was apparent during the investigation, Attila, his life revolved around working at the hotel and living close to the premises. He probably didn't have as much friends and acquaintances for him to have a life outside of work.
So they had to try and exhaust all of their options, looking at like flight manifests if anyone was trying to leave the country, booking flights, etc.
Detectives wondered if the well-travelled receptionist might be fleeing abroad or even going back home to Hungary.
As it transpired, there was an Attila Ban leaving Heathrow around about that time. So the police actually did stop the plane literally on the tarmac. Police boarded the plane, but it wasn't the correct Attila Ban, not the one we were looking for.
While the search for Attila Ban continued, detectives set about reconstructing the events leading up to the murders. What exactly had taken place in Ban's flat that night, and why had two innocent young people lost their lives? In August 2011, the Metropolitan Police Homicide Unit was investigating the murder of Alice Adams and Tibor Vass at a flat in West London. Their prime suspect, 31-year-old hotel receptionist Attila Ban, was nowhere to be found. Detectives attempted to reconstruct the events of the humid summer night when Ban and the two young victims were last seen.
Alice, Tibor and Ban all went to Ban's staff flat to have a party, playing drinking games, etc. They were also joined by two other colleagues who also had some drinks with them.
The other two men at the party that evening told the police that they left when Ban produced some pills, which he called poppers, and they thought that wasn't for them, and they departed, leaving Alice, Tibor and Ban together.
Their colleagues reported that it was a party atmosphere, everything was fine, and certainly there was no cause for alarm.
The post-mortem examinations of the two young victims told a different story.
Tibor only had 2 stab wounds, both through the heart. Alice had suffered 22 stab wounds, a really frenzied attack.
She had a stab wound to the heart. She had stab wounds to her stomach, her spleen, her diaphragm, and her lungs. So those were significant injuries and would have resulted in her death.
Now that's rage, that's anger. So somebody was taking out their rage on Alice, and it takes quite a long time to stab someone 22 times. That's not something that just happens in seconds. But Tibor's wounds were quite different. They were very, very targeted. They were targeted on his heart. There was only 2 stab wounds, and they were meant to end his life quickly and efficiently.
When the crime scene investigators looked at the flat, it seemed to them that Tibor had been stabbed on the sofa and then subsequently moved, and his body posed in this rather remarkable way.
Tibor is on the bed, he's naked, and his body's been positioned. And even though Tibor's dead, he's not really being treated as if he's dead. The killer wants to possess this man completely.
For 48 hours, the homicide squad had investigated the murders, while the manhunt for Attila Ban continued to no avail. On Friday the 12th of August, there was a disturbing breakthrough.
Some police officers went back to the flats, and one noticed that the door that he thought had been left open last time he'd there was now shut.
So those officers thought something's not quite right here. They then tried to get into that room and realized that the door had been wedged with a bed.
It was the very same bed Tibor Vass's body had been found on 2 days earlier.
The moment that they realized that they knew that somebody had to be physically in that property at that time.
Knowing that no one could have entered or left the flat without the cordon officer seeing, there was only one conclusion about who was lurking behind the bedroom door.
When the officers managed to force their way into the room, they found Ban. He was lying naked on the bed, covered in blood. He was lying face down. He had injuries to his wrists. He had a craft knife sticking in his arm, and he also had another craft-style knife sticking out of one of his buttocks.
Arrested at the scene on suspicion of murder, Attila Ban was taken to hospital for treatment to his wounds, which were not life-threatening.
Once Ban had received treatment, he was taken to a West London police station and he was interviewed.
If homicide detectives hoped for answers to the tragic deaths of Tibor and Alice, they would be sadly disappointed.
When Attila was initially interviewed, he wouldn't speak. They had to use sign language to try and see if they could ascertain what happened.
He was just had the complete impression of a man utterly in shock and utterly incapable of describing anything which had happened in the last 48 hours.
If he can't speak, he can't explain what's happened. He doesn't have to reveal anything that's happened. He might appear mentally distressed, mentally ill. So all of that could very well be self-preservation.
While Ban faced interrogation, questions were also being asked about the extraordinary circumstances of his capture.
So once the shock of Ban being found in the flat after a couple of days of quite intense forensic examination, after that shock had subsided, obviously there was a debrief to establish how and where he had been. He had been actually hiding under the divan part of the bed that Tibor had been on.
They found any number of water bottles that he'd taken in there to refresh himself over this period of time, plus his phone on which he'd updated his Facebook page, and a knife which had cut the area around so he could not only get into the divan, but also he could look out and see what the police were doing.
A mean, not in your wildest dreams could you have imagined that he would be hiding under the divan. I think all the evidence tended to suggest that he had committed 2 very violent murders and had left immediately afterwards.
Professor Jane Monckton-Smith believes Ban's bizarre actions stem from his desire to possess and control Tibor Vass.
If you imagine this man has, in a very targeted way, killed Tibor, doing the least amount of damage to his body, but making sure he's absolutely dead. At that moment, he finally possesses him. Is he just going to run out the door at that point? No, he's going to want to have that feeling of possession carry on. So he hides himself in the room for as long as he can.
After being at first apparently unable to speak, Attila Ban eventually found his voice, but concrete information was not forthcoming.
In the interview, Attila did not make any full and frank admissions as to why he killed him. All he would say is that he must have, but he was unable to recount exactly what happened.
He spent 2 days in the crime scene, being very quiet, staying hidden, knowing exactly why he was in that divan. So I think that he had no memory of the crime is probably stretching things a little. There's lots of reasons why people might say they do not remember killing someone. Now, some of it could be shock, yeah. Equally, it could be so that they don't have to actually tell people what they did, admit to it. And that may well protect them in any future trial.
Ban was able to tell officers what had happened in the hours after he stabbed Alice and Tibor to death.
Ban told the police that when he woke up and saw the terrible scene of carnage that he had clearly caused, he wanted to kill himself.
He actually took Tibor's body and placed it in the bath with him.
Ban wanted to kill himself, he said, but he didn't want to die alone.
Filling the bath with water and climbing in with the body of his victim, Attila Ban switched on a hairdryer and dropped it into the water.
All he found out was that the hairdryer worked underwater as well as it worked outside. So he got out of the bath, replaced Tibor's body back on the divan, double bed. He started then trying to hack his wrists and his neck.
He didn't harm himself enough to take his own life, and he harmed himself in some strange places. He stabbed himself in the arm, and he stabbed himself in the buttock, maybe wishing he could join Tibor in death, but just not having the courage maybe, or the ability to harm himself in that way.
Ban gave this rather complicated account that the reason he had got inside their bed was to watch the police as they were going about their business. But when the police left for the night, he would come out and move a few things around and then get back into the bed again because he didn't want to be discovered, he said, because he thought the police would save his life and prevent him from dying.
Despite his best efforts, 31-year-old Attila Ban was alive. Though they still didn't have the full story, Howard Groves' homicide team was satisfied they had caught the right man.
There was enough forensic opportunities and evidence available that we were satisfied that he had killed them, but what we were not going to be able to establish significantly was why.
On Saturday the 13th of August 2011, just a few days after the murders, Ban appeared at the Magistrates' Court charged with the murders of Tibor Vass and Alice Adams.
The police would be able to provide the prosecution with the who and the how of Alice and Tibor's untimely deaths, but not the why. It remained to be seen if Attila Ban's trial would bring answers for their devastated families and bring a killer to justice. On Monday the 9th of July 2012, 11 months after Tibor Vass and Alice Adams were murdered in a West London flat, 32-year-old Attila Ban stood trial at London's Central Criminal Court, known as the Old Bailey.
Ban faced 2 charges in a very simple indictment. Number 1, murder of Tibor. Number 2, murder of Alice. Ban entered an interesting plea that he said he was not guilty to murder, but guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
Which basically means he accepted that he had killed Alice and Tibor, but that he didn't know what he was doing at the time.
Given the circumstances of the crime and the fact that he clearly was obsessed about Tibor and had behaved so erratically, it's quite possible that that diminished responsibility would be able to be made plausible in court.
The prosecution argued at Ban's trial that he had fancied Tibor and that some kind of sexual jealousy had taken place on the night of the party at Ban's flat.
The prosecutor claimed that Ban's frustration had reached a desperate pitch because he knew that time was running out to ensnare the object of his affections.
We knew that Tibor was going to be going back to Hungary. Therefore, Attila's opportunities to form a relationship with him were even less likely.
At some point during the evening, sexual activity had taken place between Tibor, Alice and Attila Ban.
DNA was found on Alice's chest, and they related both to Attila and Tibor.
However, it was asserted in court that witnessing Alice and Tibor's attraction towards one another was what finally tipped Ban over the edge.
The prosecution case was that Ban had seen Alice and Tibor kissing, and through drink and other drugs had acted in a violent rage.
We were able to show that the level of injuries that Tibor received was significantly less to what Alice received. So we're going to try and show the jury that Attila had this deep-rooted anger or hatred towards Alice.
There's no doubt that in that moment he saw Alice as an obstacle to his affection. It was a rush of blood which had been building up for a very long time.
Though his lawyer confirmed that Attila Ban accepted he had stabbed Tibor and Alice, Ban did not take the stand to explain his actions.
I don't find that particularly surprising, because he would have to admit and talk about things that he really would not want to talk about.
Ban looked a lost soul in the dock through the weeks of that trial. He was gazing around the court. He was making no contribution to passing notes or anything to his defence team. He was just walked in with his prison officers and walked out again. He didn't seem engaged. He didn't seem remorseful. He didn't seem in any way fighting to win this case. He just seemed utterly detached.
Ban's lawyer told the court that Ban was deeply remorseful and he really wanted to explain what he'd done to the families of both Tibor and Alice.
Jane Monckton-Smith doubts that Attila Ban's offer of an explanation was made in good faith.
That offer was not made through remorse. That's control. He still wants to possess him, even in death. What makes him think that he could give them any relief from their pain? The man who killed their son. No, he wants them now in his life. It's cruelty.
On Wednesday the 18th of July, Ban was found guilty by the jury of the murders of Alice and Tibor. It's quite telling, I think, that the jury only took 5 hours of deliberation to find Ban guilty. I mean, this, in my experience, was an incredibly short time, and I think points towards the strength of evidence against Ban.
Ban was sentenced to life with a minimum tariff of 26 years.
The judge, in his sentencing, described Ban as a vain and paranoid young man who killed 2 decent young people. He also commented on the fact that because Ban was still refusing to accept full responsibility and give an accurate account of what happened, it still left their families not knowing what happened in their last few moments.
In the wake of the verdict, Alice's mother made a statement, and it was extremely moving. What she asked for was the details of why her daughter, her lovely daughter, had lost her life in this extraordinary way. She said, "I don't mind if the details are horrific, but at least it stopped me wondering what had happened." And you have to feel for her for that.
And it was very moving that Alice's mother said that she felt that she had failed to protect her daughter, when of course there was nothing she could possibly have done. Tibor's mother said that her grief was multiplied countless times because the murder of her son had taken place really just a matter of weeks before he was due to leave London and come back to Hungary.
And it was extra agony to Tibor's mother that the person that had committed this awful crime was somebody that they had come to trust and believe would actually look after Tibor, but in fact the opposite couldn't be further from the truth.
Those investigating this dreadful crime had to conclude Ban's actions were driven simply by hatred, jealousy, and resentment.
In many ways, he was like a loner. His life revolved around the hotel, whereas the other 2 were youngsters who were happy to go out and have a good time with their friends, and Attila didn't like that.
What you can surmise is that he has acted out of rage and jealousy and taken away the lives of 2 thoroughly decent, innocent young people for nothing, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. The day after the trial, Alice's family announced that they wanted to raise £100,000 for a treehouse playground in her memory.
In January 2016, the treehouse was officially opened in Black Park, Iver, as a joyful tribute to a much-loved young woman. In the summer of 2011, hotel receptionist Attila Ban stole the lives of 2 young, vibrant colleagues who had their whole future ahead of them. For lashing out in a rage born of jealousy and frustration and causing devastation that is still felt to this day, Attila Ban has cemented his place as one of Britain's most evil killers.